We are having a blast with this Beyond Hiawatha podcast. Hello, friends. Welcome aboard. Bill Hobson here. And today, our special guest is Tina Shannon Worrall. I say all three names because when she was on staff, she was Tina Shannon. And in this instance, I've known our featured guest for a very long time, even before she ever touched foot in the sandy grounds of Hiawatha Youth Camp because we go way back. So, uh, Tina, we have an ice-breaking first question that we like to ask every guest just to kind of get the conversation flowing. And my question for you is this: if you had to put at the top of your personal leaderboard the Hiawatha meal that you would kill for right now if you could just have it again, what would be that food product that maybe it's a meal, maybe it's something else that you remember from the kitchen area that you would just love to see right now?
Okay, first of all, it's a no-brainer. It's Happy's Donuts.
Yeah, it really is.
And especially if you could sneak a few extra before they were actually being served because they were like super warm and they had the glaze and everything. But usually Happy would catch you pretty quickly, come out yelling, and then you had to skedaddle. So the joy was short-lived. But I don't know. I worked in the sweet shop, so I had, easy access to the Super Youper Club and about 1,000 sweet tart lollies on a daily basis. So many good things to choose from. But I do recall one meal I never skipped was chicken fingers. And I don't know what that says about American appetites, but nothing real special, just chicken fingers and fries, and I was happy. We also, I think, had some good amount of competitions with grilled cheese and tomato soup.
Yeah.
So I can't say that we really tasted them because we inhaled them and then we would see how many, we could eat compared to our other staff members. So those were just a few memorable meals.
Yeah, see, for me, it was Sunday dinner because that pot roast was unbeatable, and Hoppy and Lyle would be back in the kitchen, and it would be the legit real deal. However, I do think that if she had been able to mass produce those donuts, we would never have heard of Krispy Kreme.
Yeah.
There's no comparison between the Hoppy donuts and any other brand. Okay, so let's go back in time here a bit. When do you recall when you first even like were introduced to the concept of a summer camp and this place called Hiawatha, and then when you first went there?
Yes. So I think it might have been 1983. And I had a friend from church, Kendra Hobson, you might know her.
I'm familiar.
And her family, well, she invited me to come to summer camp at Hiawatha. And her parents, who also went to my church, you might know, um, they reassured us that they knew about this camp and that they knew the people that ran this camp and it was a good camp because my parents had never heard of it, nor had I. And so it was 83, so parents did things like this, and they were just like, "Oh, you want to travel like, 5 hours away with this other family
To the middle of a
and be
forest.
and be gone." In fact, I was invited to spend one week at the family cottage before camp, and then another week as a camper at the camp. So yeah, my parents were like, "Hey, 2 weeks away, whatever. We don't even really know where this place is." And so I went with this family. I do remember a really obnoxious older brother of Kendra's that probably rode with us.
Wow. What?
And
Tell us more.
and we got there and I was kind of like, is this it? Like it didn't, there were no like huge water slides or things that I had sort of envisioned as, being fun for a summer camp. There were no horses. There weren't like carnival rides and Ferris wheels. But we kind of got acquainted with the place for the first week at the summer cottage. And then I was a camper with her. And I remember very vividly that first week and my counselor, and that was kind of a small week. And for whatever reason, for lack of all of those grandiose activities that I expected, not that we didn't do some activities, but really it was more about the relationships. I built so many relationships and felt like I belonged, and I really enjoyed the speakers, and I got, they really caused me to think. And in my little 8-year-old mind, I thought like, this feels like home. Like I want to come back here.
So junior camp was your introduction.
Yes.
Who was your
Yep.
speaker during junior camp back then? Do you remember?
You know, sadly, I don't recall the speaker that first week, that first year. Um, but it might have even just been staff members, to be honest, that somehow pinch hit during that time. But I just remember thinking like, wow, this is really, this is really cool. I really engaged with what they said, and I loved the whole camp concept. I had not really been introduced, to that before. So when I came back, it became apparent to my parents that I was going to be asking to go back every summer. So they were like, all right. The next year I was, asked again and again. And then eventually it was just a given that I was, going to be coming and continued to crash at that family's summer cottage, by the way, as much as I could.
Believe that was lot 23 before it became lot 7 on the other side of the lake. One of the conversations that I've had numerous times through the decades with people who are asking about Hiawatha, and they're asking, well, what's there? Especially if it's a youth pastor and he's wondering about sending kids from his church. And I would always answer that by saying, Hiawatha's not going to win the bells and whistles competition, right? The zip lines, the rock walls, the horses, the all the other things that you were mentioning, um, they really weren't that a part of the ministry equation there, and the focus on relationships and the focus on bringing young people closer to Christ sounds, it's hard to put into a brochure, right? It's hard to capture that on a website, but it's the thing, it's what has sustained the ministry now continuing on at the new location in the Lower Peninsula. You remember when you first had one of those? I think my I think my whole perspective on God and faith and life is changing because of what I'm hearing, what I'm experiencing, my counselor talk and the relationships. Do you remember like the light bulb moment at all?
Well, first of all, I think to go back to what you said, I think you're gravely underestimating the draw of the blob era.
There's a lot of scarred young people who have spent a lot of hang time in the air on the blob.
Right. Right. So we did have, some activities.
Yes. Oh,
But
a beach that no other camp could match. So,
yeah,
yeah.
right. Uh, but to your point, I think really what I took away from my time as a camper and as a staff member, was more about those relationships and the messages and the effort to invest in the campers, in their lives, in their way of thinking, to give them a firm foundation for their faith, to give them a place where they felt like they belonged, where they could really dig into their identity. Um, I'm trying to think back of when I had so many years there, both as a camper and a staffer, and just time around the camp, that it's hard to kind of pull out a first impression, but I can pull out a few that maybe came even a little bit later.
Mhm.
One of them was, back then the director gave an altar call every Tuesday night. I think maybe that still happens in some capacity.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, it became an expected, like the first time it happened, you're like, oh wow, they're doing an altar call. And then if you made a return visit, you would realize this happens every Tuesday.
Mhm.
And there's something to be said for that because it created this tradition and this expectation of, hey, things are going great, I'm having fun, but now we're going to dig deep on Tuesday. And one of the times that I remember, I mean, there were many, but one that really stuck with me and still flows through my thoughts today was a message about the first, second, and third generation. And there were some illustrations about, David being the first generation, he had a whole heart for God. And then here comes his children, and they sort of had a half a heart for God. And then here comes his grandchildren, and they really have no heart for God. And that really stuck with me because my grandpa was a pastor.
Mhm.
And, I'm not saying anything against my mom or the second generation, but I recognize that it's really easy to drift from some of the foundational biblical teachings that you've been given. And I felt like I had really been given a gift. I had been surrounded by a lot of biblical truth early on in life. But then it was up to me what to do with it. Was I going to be, this third generation that was just aloof or forgot about it or, turned away from God even? Or was I going to return and become the new first generation and have a whole heart for God and then, and then try to pass that along to future generations as well. So I remember going up to that altar and thinking like, I am not going to be like that third generation. Like that's not me. And that decision really stuck with me.
Yeah, that's powerful. It's remarkable how, as we get older, how quickly we can go back to that, to those moments, to that altar, or to the overpowering moment and the moving of the Holy Spirit. And for whatever reason, and I'll never understand it fully, but the Lord truly blessed and continues to bless what happens on Tuesday nights. Not that He doesn't all the other nights where the invited speaker is in, but on Tuesday nights, when Billy Walker would speak, and now still Billy Jr. speaks on Tuesday nights, there's something special about it. There's a special focus on that. And all around the globe, and it's not exaggerating to say this, all around the globe, there are people serving the Lord in various capacities who will say, it was a Tuesday night at a place called Hiawatha where I made the decision to do what I'm doing today.
Yeah.
We talk about the legacy lives on, as the theme of the podcast. Well, in that way, it really, really does. And it's just so cool. And it's such a blessing. So at some point you went from camper and hanging out at our family cottage to thinking about, I think I might want to serve on this staff. And most campers, many campers who spend a few summers at Hiawatha, you eventually kind of get this little thought like, oh, the staff looks like they're having a lot of fun. I might like to try that. What do you remember the years that you served on staff? Like I couldn't pass this test by naming the years, but do you remember? You're pretty good with dates.
Yep. So I was asked to be on staff by one Ellen Hobson. She was communicating the message of the director.
Yeah.
And so actually she asked me in a year that I had already, it was sort of like a halfway thing. I had already been a camper and they needed some extra staff toward the end of the summer and they wondered if I could just stay. And frankly, I said no that first time. That was 1990. And the reason was, just like you said, I was having so much, I was getting so much out of it as a camper being poured into, and I wanted to sort of soak every last bit of that as much as I could. But then the next year, I was like, for sure, I'm going to go into the summer knowing like that's going to be my role, and it's my turn now to pour into campers.
Mm.
Not that I won't continue to be poured into, but now my role is, to invest back in the campers that come on the grounds. So that was 1991. I remained on staff. I kind of did this weird thing when I graduated from college in 95. I had to do this thing they call work, and I had a full-time job. And it really cramped my style when it came to the summer.
Well, let me just stop you for a brief second because everybody listening can relate to what you're saying. The first summer that you can't be on staff is a killer. It
Yeah,
is brutal. And your coworkers are looking at you like, what? Why do you keep talking about how you wish you were? Of course, we all wish we were on vacation. You're like, it wasn't vacation.
right.
It was so different. So yeah, everybody's like, oh, I remember that first summer and it's not fun.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I did not become a teacher and just get my summers off, and I had to, I had to work. But I loved it so much that what I did for the next 10 years was I figured out ways to save up all my vacation time for the summer. And then I took every last bit that I had, I schedule adjusted, I rearranged basically my life so that I could be there as much as possible.
You did that for
And
10 years?
yeah, for
I
another
did
10
not
years.
know that. Wow.
Yeah.
And with your focus primarily in that period of time on the sweet shop, this was kind of like your cheers, right? You were the you were the queen of the sweet shop.
Yes.
Why that area? Why was that your jam?
It probably was because the director didn't really have anywhere else to put me, I'm sure. He probably was like, I don't know what to do with this Tina girl. She's kind of hanging around. So I landed there. I was a counselor also, but really I felt like just as much my ministry was the sweet shop. And honestly, I mean, it might have just been an afterthought or whatever, but whoever decided to put me there, whether they recognized it or not, one of the parts of my, personality, or one of the things that I'm passionate about is really finding the kids who don't really fit in, or who don't really have a place. Maybe they're not athletic, so they didn't enjoy afternoon games. They're not really musical, so they're not really participating in anything about that. Maybe they weren't beach people, so they didn't really want to go down in the heat of the summer and hang out at the beach. Maybe they came alone, didn't have a big friend group, but they all were hungry, so they would come into the sweet shop in the afternoon and and then order some food. And if they sat there by themselves or whatever, I mean, they just would linger. This was, like you said, sort of the place it was sort of centrally located on the grounds, and people would come in and out of there inevitably every day, every afternoon. And I looked forward to it because that allowed me to get to know the campers and fellow staff in a more sort of one-on-one or small group way, and really talk with them. So I would serve them their food, and we'd play some music and and have a little fun, and then I would be able to have a serious conversation with them and really get to know them and ask why they're there and how their week's been going. And I just really always gravitated toward that, and that became what I saw as my ministry there.
Yeah, and a lot of people would say the same thing. They think of that sweet shop, they think of Tina. You were always behind the counter. Like I said, it's kind of like Sam Malone and Cheers with a better product. We're not
Right,
pushing
right.
the same inventory. Okay, the the friends that you form on staff and as a camper tend to be the friends that you keep forever. That's one of the relationship blessings that comes from Hiawatha. And generally speaking, while those friendships are forming, you find some ways to get into trouble. Just from time to time, maybe the director has to have a word with you at some point. And I had a few meetings with the director as well. What's the most trouble that Tina Shannon got in on staff?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, you have to know that my dad was a police officer. And so I was raised in a house where
Law and
no
order.
matter which way I tried to be sneaky or get away with something, his investigative skills would immediately detect. It's like some sort of warning light would go off. Meh, meh, meh. Tina is planning to go TP the neighbors, and he would like hone in on it. He would find me out every time. I'd like to think that I wasn't that sloppy with my information, like I was trying to be stealthy, but he always knew. And that sort of ingrained in me this fear of being able to get away with what I wanted to get away with, as a teenager. So, and I love to do pranks, and I love to, just sort of mess with people. But it was really hard to do growing up. The only time I really got away with it was maybe in college, where I was able to, pull a few pranks successfully. But at camp, the director at the time, Billy Walker, just had this way of instilling the fear of God into you. And it was very reminiscent of my dad's, demeanor in that sense. And so I was really quite worried that he would immediately find me out, which he always did, no
Yeah.
matter who it was, not just me. And that there would be, not consequences, like there was no fine to pay or anything like that, but it was just I didn't I didn't want to face the look. I
It
didn't want to
is.
face the red-faced, fisted look like he was so mad. Now having said that, it mostly kept me out of trouble, but it didn't keep me from finding humor in those around me who got in trouble. So I often was privy to, and maybe even an accomplice to, from time to time, folks who snuck out, who mostly it had to do with sneaking out and being where you weren't supposed to be after hours. So there was a few infamous, there were a few infamous instances, like with a pontoon ride after hours. I was not on the pontoon, but I may have been in the same cabin as some who left for, and I might have been a lookout of some kind. I don't know.
A lookout.
Um, so I was kind of always played the role of the accomplice, and therefore, of course, could somehow weasel out of the consequences more easily. Um, I think the pontoon may have run out of gas or quit, and there may have been an instance where people were stranded in the middle of the lake at the wee hours of the morning. Unfortunately, the director stayed up to the wee hours, so he figured out quickly that there were people yelling and screaming out in the middle of the lake, and he surmised also that it was not people drowning or panic, but rather laughing and trying to figure out how they were going to get the pontoon back to shore.
Was that pontoon
So
at all related to my family?
it might have been there might have been a few members of your family, namely one, involved in that. I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus. I'm just saying most of my eyewitness accounts uh, to people getting in trouble or things like that were had to do with sneaking out. And I may or may not have had knowledge of some of those. Just going to plead the fifth on that.
Appreciate that. You know, you mentioned briefly your dad. He passed a couple of years ago, and you are more than welcome to say, I just don't want to talk about this. But one of the things that I really appreciated about the impact of camp on you and your family was that your dad, at that stage of his life, was not actively engaged in church, right? He wasn't attending on a regular basis. He would come up to Hiawatha and bring his electrical tools and he would serve. He would fix stuff. He would be up on light poles. He would be fixing those night lights and all those different things. I'm just kind of curious as you kind of look back on that aspect of those days, what it means to you now to remember that, wow, that was one of those times where we were all together. We were all in this thing together.
Yeah. So again, my dad, he didn't really understand, when I said I want to go up to the UP at the time where Hiawatha was and just serve on this camp. Not only was that really a foreign concept to him because he wasn't raised in a family that was involved in ministry that way, but also he wasn't raised going to camp. So even just camping in general, other than just like a camper at Mackinac, like, a campsite, but he wasn't familiar with camp ministry.
Mhm.
So it was kind of not really on his, I mean, he never thought that that's something that I would be involved in because it just wasn't something he had been involved in that way. But when it became apparent, which was pretty early on, that this was important to me and that this was going to play an important role in my life, I think, to be honest, he saw the fruits of it. So when I would come home from a week at camp, and suddenly my daughter is talking differently and has a different attitude and wants to be in church and wants to be a positive influence on her friends or whatever he was seeing in me as a result, the buy-in, it was a lot easier to get buy-in at that point because he saw the results. Um, he saw the impact that it was making. He saw that the friends that I was making through that process were positive friends. He did not worry about these friends, making me a more negative person or having a more negative influence on me because he could see it in real life. It played out not just at camp, but year round then. When I came back home, I continued those friendships and he saw that they were pouring into me, that they were making me a better person in ways that, frankly, as a parent, he just, he couldn't. I mean, he did in his way as a parent, but once you hit those teenage and college years, it's your friends that are going to play a greater role for better or for worse in who you become. And so, as I try to direct my own children now as they're hitting those teenage years, like pick your friends wisely because they're going to make, whether you like it or not, they're going to make a huge impact in your life. Um, and so he would want to spend time with me and as a family during the summer. Well, my summers were spent at camp. Like that was a given. At some point, I stopped even asking because it was just such a given. Like I'm going to be up at Hiawatha the moment that I can leave, and I would pack up the car and go. And so if he wanted to spend time with his daughter, it was going to be at camp. So he came up to camp.
Yeah.
And I don't know that he ever again, a lot of this was just foreign to him in the way that camp ministry happens, in the way that services were laid out. He had been raised Catholic, and this was very different. The music that was used, if we're being honest, I don't know that he really enjoyed the style of a lot of those things, and a lot of them are geared toward, teenagers anyway, and he wasn't one of those at that point. But what he did appreciate was the interaction and the engagement on those that he was watching. You
Yeah.
know, if he came in and he would kind of duck into the back row for a service, or, the impact, like I said, on me and the friends around me. To be honest, there was a time frame when he would not step foot in a church. He was angry at God. He didn't want to go to church. The churches that he had been involved in as a child had sort of failed him, so to speak. But he would come to a service at Hiawatha during some of those years because he would come up to visit and he wanted to see me sing. He wanted to see me as being a part of the service. He wanted to know about these speakers that I was talking about that had such a great impact on me. And so he would slip into the back, probably wearing something completely inappropriate for most church services, probably some ratty, shirt or whatever. Didn't care. He just slipped into the back and he listened. And he might not have even commented at that time about all those things, but I know that it played a role. I know that it made an impact
Hmm.
because later he would bring it up to me and say, I mean, he said to me many times as an adult that he was so grateful for the impact of Hiawatha in my life.
Well, we often, and rightfully so, when we talk about Hiawatha, we talk about the front half of the auditorium, the kids. There's ministry reaching the back half of the auditorium as well, all the way to the back row, and in the case of the Upper Peninsula location, in the balcony, right? So
Right.
the words and the biblical teaching and the insights coming from these speakers is not limited to kids, even if it's geared towards them. And it's one of the just the amazing ways that the Lord can work through whatever your heart needs, can find in a message, even if the message is junior camp week, right? There are
Yeah.
people who still sing the books of the Bible song that they learned from Pam Henderson that they
Right.
never have learned anywhere else. And that's how they recite the books. That's how they learned it. So, um, okay, so I've got to ask you about the impact of Mrs. Hopper in your life. There are a lot of people who didn't work in the kitchen, but would pull up a chair in the kitchen, especially when things were kind of out of whack in life and just, it's just confusing. And here we are, teenagers, and we don't know what way is up and what's the Lord up to and what's he working on. And you would kind of go to the kitchen and you
Hmm.
would do it not before the meal because she's a little bit busy, but you would do it after the meal. And I don't think she ever cared if she left the kitchen. She would sit there as long as the conversation was going. And I know you had a lot of those. If you close your eyes and think of a moment with Hoppy, what's that moment look like for you?
Well, first of all, I never I you're right. I never worked in the kitchen. I was on sweet shop duty or counseling in a cabin, but that didn't stop me from going in the kitchen by any means. And uh, I did, in fact, go in before meals. And quickly I realized that she was busy, but that was no big deal because what she would do is just put you to work. She would literally say, if you're going to be in here, I got a meal to prepare. Here's a butcher knife and a chicken. Go ahead and chop the chicken,
Talk.
into a bloody pulp while you're talking to me, because otherwise, we got to get kids fed. And so I would oblige on more than one occasion and pitch in the kitchen and be put to work by Hoppy. But that was her. I mean, she was a simple everything was it just Happy had a way of making everything seem so simple,
Mm.
right? Like we complicate it with our the way that she would put it, our big city problems and our big city methods and all this chaos and busyness and overthinking things. And she would just always had a way of bringing it down to, a donut and a simple answer, a hug, and be on your way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
So
all of a sudden it was like, yeah, actually it wasn't as complicated as I thought. It really does boil down to that. The donut, that helped, of course. But yeah, as I spent more time on staff, I realized the simple wisdom of someone who really knew how to focus on the important things in life
mm,
and how easy it was once I would go back home to my busy life, or what I felt like was busy. um, Things got complicated, and I always returned to that kitchen and to that altar to be grounded, like to remind myself to hear people pouring in messages and truth in a way that really grounded me. Um, and so the impact is, I can't tell you the number of times that I go through a day, even now, and think, okay, what would Happy say about this? Or, what would Billy say about this? Or all these folks who really um, played such a significant role in developing my character. Obviously, I'm asking that not because they were perfect in my mind, and I saw, plenty of their imperfections day out, day out, and they saw mine too, and that was the beauty of it.
Hmm.
But they always then were able to package God's truth in a realistic and applicable way. They knew me well enough. They took the time to get to know me well enough that they could say it in a way that was truthful and often frank, but still I knew came, through the lens of love. And because of that, it had a whole different, it landed differently than someone who just gave me feedback that didn't come through that same lens.
Oh, that's really good. I love the way you put that. And there are scenes or there are moments, there are things that all of us, especially those of us in the older side of all of these discussions, that we would love to recreate, just to have like this snapshot. For me, because of the memories and the fun that we would have on the softball field, I would love nothing more than an 83-degree July Thursday afternoon with marathon, an intense game where guys are yelling at each other. Billy Walker's the umpire. He's using an analog watch with a second hand on it, and he's losing track of time. So one team's batting for 7 minutes, and the other team gets 2 minutes because he just forgot where he was. And it's intense, and you're covered in dirt, and you just love, and then you get done, and you go over to that stupid drinking hose or the little spigot over there by the side of the record. Those are the moments, the snapshots, the recreation moments for me. That and staff meetings, which I just love those gatherings. As we kind of wind down our time together, if you could put a scene together, what scene would you just love to kind of, use the flux capacitor and go back in time and step into?
That's a tough one, Bill, because you even mentioned a few that I would love to return to. You got marathon softball, which I also, loved, and I've explained to my daughter who plays softball the joy of, running in hot weather on a sandy, uneven field until you're just about ready to throw up, but then asking to play another inning. Um, there's something about that just it can't be, it's so hard to recreate it, especially, at my age with my knees. But and certainly you alluded to, time in the kitchen, hearing some wise words from Hoppy. There are messages and altar calls that I would love to relive, both as someone who went up to the altar and as someone who sat in the back from time to time and watched God work in the lives of others. Like it was very inspirational and moving to me to know that I had been part of that in some way. But another one that really maybe we haven't touched on that really sticks with me is the chance to go on a Friday night as a visitor
Hmm.
in particular and be asked to come and join the current staff to sing Press On.
Oh my goodness. That's such a good pull right there. I can't believe I didn't think of that.
So, like for me,
Oh
that
man.
always brought things full circle. Like I was a visitor here, I was a camper here, I was on staff here. I am, I'm an adult here who reaps the benefits, and now I'm being asked to come back and join through all, join with others who are all now fulfilling their role in Hiawatha. And there was just something really
Yeah.
impactful about that to me that made me feel like part of something much bigger than just my time there.
Hmm. Okay, so before we began this podcast, not you and I mean like before we started the concept of the podcast, a search has been underway to find the original version of Press On. Selah did an updated version and it was great. And there were two members of Selah who were campers at Hiawatha, which is what spurred them on to record that song. Um, Billy Jr. found it. And so Here's what's fascinating about that memory that you just pulled me back into. Going back as an adult, as an alumni, and being invited onto the platform on Friday to sing that song, which, they don't do it anymore because kids are like, that's a trombone. Why do I? So I understand the
Right.
orchestration is a little bit dated. As an adult, I was crying before we sang a note because of Billy's introduction, right?
Yeah.
He's setting the context for that song. I mean, as masterfully as you would think he would, he's setting the context for that song, which is when you leave this place, life's going to get difficult. And when those moments come, in Jesus' name, we press on. Have you found yourself singing that song to yourself as an adult, far removed from your days at camp, but having that message ingrained in you because of those moments? I know I have. I'm guessing you have as well.
Yeah, and that's part of why, that sticks out to me. One of the things that sticks out to me, um, so intensely, other than just the fact that it connects me with people who went before me and people who go after me, who've served in that same ministry, and it brings that feeling of continuity and nostalgia. But the message of the song itself, as simple as it is, um, like kind of wraps it all up. Like I talked about the simplicity of Hoppy's, advice to me from time to time. It
Right.
just brings this simple message back home. Like, yeah, it's going to get really tough. And, yeah, those of us who have, put a few more years behind us realize that just when you think it's it's as tough as it's going to get, we are thrown with something else that is like, I didn't even know that life could get this hard.
Mm,
And yet I've watched people go before me and struggle with, with health issues, with family issues, with things that are completely out of their control that have been devastating. And I've watched them go through it. And then I had to go through some of those things myself. And I've watched my peers go through some of them. And then I know that I'm responsible to guide a future generation, for those who go behind me to navigate those waters too. But the advice is the same, right? Like it's going to get tough. In Jesus' name, we keep going.
yeah.
Like at the end of the day, you could try to answer all the questions. You can try to bring your big city answers, as Happy might say, into it. But it just really boils down to like obey, move forward, keep doing what God has asked you to do. Like that's all you can do.
Yeah.
The whys, we might never know. We might never be able to figure out why we had to suffer this here and why that person had to go through that here. But it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we band together, we say the same words, which is in Jesus' name we press on. And
Mhm.
that's what we do.
I cannot think of a more perfect way to conclude our conversation. For those of you who are listening to the podcast version of this, we're going to play that song right now. For those of you watching on YouTube, sorry, you're out of luck. YouTube will strike it down for a copyright violation and the whole video will be taken down. So go figure. But prepare your hearts just for a moment. Uh, because as we play this archived version, it's scratchy. It's cassette from a million years ago, recorded, I don't know, on the moon or something. You'll get the idea, and you'll be taken back in time. Tina, thank you for sharing and for sharing your heart with us. And you've got a gift for the way that you communicate memories like that. So much appreciated.
You're welcome. Happy to do it.